One.
Okay, hi everyone. My name's Karen and I write books and stuff. And I'm also very exhausted and having hot flushes, so I apologise. Okay, so today we're here to launch, officially launch Department of Curiosities. That's the latest book, that's my 5th book. It was released on the 22nd of May when we were in New Zealand going to the Oamaru Steampunk Festival, which is the largest steampunk festival in the Southern Hemisphere. That's really cool. Literally, because it was lovely and freezing cold, so it was wonderful, I loved it. And we were actually at Hobbiton that day when it was released. So this is the first event it's been to. I talk about the book has been to. Yes, we're going to talk a bit about that today. So I assume everyone here knows what steampunk is. Yeah. So, but I'm going to ask a question now. This is an interactive one. What do you think steampunk is? There's no right or wrong answer, by the way.
I don't know, it's more something my husband does. But
Okay.
it's just
What do you
all
think
about
steampunk? Yep.
I was just like more about the period clothes and
Yep.
the funkiness of it.
Yep. And what do you think steampunk is?
It's a genre of the Victorian era modernised.
Cool. What do you think steampunk is? You don't have to answer it, you can go pass.
I've got a very bad cold at the moment,
That's okay.
but cross between Victoriana, science fiction, and whatever I wanted to do.
That's a good one, I like that one. Sharon, what do you think steampunk is? No, pass from Sharon, she's drinking. Sharon's mum? No, okay. What do you think steampunk might be? There's no right or wrong answer.
Alternate history.
Yes, cool. What do you think?
Got two. So it's the second industrial revolution.
Yep.
So the diesel power, but done those technologies, but done in steam instead.
Yep.
And it's also a whitewashing of colonial history to make Britain seem nowhere as bad as it actually was.
Yes, and I forgot to tape this. I audio taped these for my own thing because last year, which was good, the video died. And so luckily I had the last bit on it. Okay, so Sharon's mum, you've got something now?
I think it's good fun without any side effects.
Yes. What do you think steampunk might be? Do you know what steampunk is?
Sorry?
Do you know what steampunk is?
I read a little bit, not
Yes.
much.
What do you think it might be?
It's a collection of people from the early Victorian era, dressed as early Americans, games people,
Stuff.
and cosplay.
Cool. So there's lots of different. Everyone has a different definition of steampunk, and that's actually a good thing. We'll talk about that tomorrow a bit more in my talk tomorrow about steampunk. So it's probably the most common thing is it's a retro style speculative fiction, which sounds really influenced by classic Victorian science fiction. And seen through the filter of modern attitudes, that's right, and there is often a bit of whitewashing. I'm actually here today dressing up in colonial outfit, aren't I? Because the thing is, it's for the good of the empire, but it's, we'll get on to that. Okay, I'm an indie writer, I'm an indie publisher, which means I do it all myself. I don't have a publisher to pay for anything for me, and I've got to go and do all the marketing and everything myself, so that's why we do these talks. So people know I'm here. Yay. I write in multiple points of view, so I don't just have one point of view, I actually have different ones. In my previous series I got into the bad guy's head. I actually get into a couple of different people's heads in here. It's a little bit different. This is actually not as dark as my first series. This is more an adventure type thing, so it's a bit more rollicking fun. So the official blurb for it is, it's a steampunk tale of adventure. There we go. A heroine, mad scientists, traitors and secrets. So these are some of the books I've done. So the first one is Adventures of Viola Stewart, which I talked about in the past. Auntie, and it isn't technically steampunk, it's a cosy paranormal mystery set in current day Adelaide. And the last one, Department of Curiosities, Department of Curiosities is the one we're doing today. Okay, ready to go. So we've got some characters. So Matilda. Okay. On the back of the book, it's Miss Matilda Meriwether. She's the main character. We'll talk about her in a minute. Has a secret. Actually, she has several. One of them shaped her adult life. Another now controls it. Her Majesty Queen Victoria has controlled the empire. She is the empire and creator of its secrets. There's lots of secrets in this one. So Avery works with Department of Curiosities, the keepers of secrets, especially if they're useful to the Empire. When Tillie finds herself in employment of the Department of Curiosities, she realises that's the perfect opportunity to uncover the truth she's been searching for, but the Queen has other plans for her. So as you know in steampunk, well, people who know a bit about steampunk, there's often mad scientists and secret societies and political and all this sort of stuff happening, and there's a lot of it in this one. So this series is in the same world as the Viola Stewart, so it's in the same world as the first series, but it's on a more adventure level. It's no dark, mysterious stuff. It's set about 5 years earlier, so this one's set in 1883 before the other one, which started in 1888 with Jack the Ripper. Different characters, so you've got Miss Matilda Meriwether. Yeah, and you're going to explain that one, okay. Professor Avery Allington, who later is called Lord Allington, which gets a bit confusing. General Edward Sabine. Now he actually was a historical character, and that's another thing that happens a lot in steampunk is you get historical characters like Tesla or the Queen is very common. Edison, there's a whole heap of people that get brought out. And he was actually the president of the Royal Society for a while. Does everyone know what the Royal Society was? No. So the Royal Society was this society for science. So all the scientists would go there and they'd do their lectures and they'd do their books and stuff, but you had to be accepted into the society. So they didn't accept the first woman into the society till, I think it was 1901 or something, I think. Yeah, because, you know, it was the men's world, unfortunately, as Adrian, I told you about his names, talked about whitewashing. So we'll talk a bit about that too. The good thing that can be about steampunk is we can use the punk part of it to look at women's roles of coloured people, roles of people of different gender. Then you can do all that sort of stuff with punk, and that's good. And so tomorrow I'll talk more about what's happening in steampunk overseas and things that are happening. But a lot of stories are now tending to go towards that a lot more, which is a good thing because, like with all things in history, we should assess them and we have to live with the fact that they're there, but we can look at them from our point of view and discuss them. And that's the good thing about steampunk. It's like your traditional science fiction when they used to do that sort of thing. It's gadget light. What that means is this isn't dripping with everyone's got gadgets dropping off their arms and stuff like that. In the first series, Queen Victoria had something horrible happen to her, and she's outlawed a lot of gadgetry because she thinks it's not safe for the general populace, because that's what Queen Victoria does. And of course, Tillie doesn't agree with that, so we'll get onto that too. We learned about the Department of Curiosities. Now that's a bit like Warehouse 13. So the Department of Curiosities, the gadgets are often called mechanicals or curiosities is what the Queen calls them, and she puts them into this warehouse type thing and they get put away. And of course, because there's all these machinations things, there may or may not be people in the Department of Curiosities that are unhappy about that. Okay, we meet the Men in Grey again. If you've read the other ones, Men in Grey are bad guys, and they're still trying to take over the Empire in the background there. There's an interesting new character, which is actually an orb, a little tiny orb like a piece of like an eyeball that sits around Tillie's neck, and it talks to her telepathically. So it's a little bit into the fantasy bit there. And tomorrow we'll be talking about science fiction versus fantasy and what steampunk is there. By the end of the story, we're in Australia, which is what I wanted to do all along, is write steampunk in Australia. I've done a couple of short stories there. So, and the second book will be mostly set in Australia. And of course, very conveniently, Krakatoa happens, so you don't get any communications back to England, so it's very convenient for the story. Yes, sometimes history works really well in your favour. And of course the story is unto itself. It does lead into the second book, but again, I like to wrap things up. I don't like to have it like a cliffhanger and you have to buy the next book. Nothing pees me off worse than that. Okay, so the new characters, we got Miss Matilda Meriwether, or Tillie. She has to spell this one out. So. Okay, she has a secret. We've talked about that before. And this writing is too small and it's dark. Oh my gosh. Okay, she's the new heroine. Okay, there we go. And she's actually Sharon's cousin. the lovely model who did that. So she's about 21, and she's successfully avoided the trappings of being presented into society so far. She's very, very happy about that. She's very vexed by the society's insistence that she needs a man. She doesn't think she needs a man. And she's a young woman on a personal quest to find about her father's fate. Something happened to her father, and and then I realised everyone has something happen to their father, but it's a plot point. You'll get it in the second book. Okay. She's lived with her Aunt Prudence and her uncle since her father died, and he was actually subsequently accused of treason. So this is all in we're going to be reading chapter 4 today, because I worked out that we actually read chapter 1 last time, and I couldn't read chapter 1 again, so you need a little bit of background. During her crusade, she's found this curious object, which is the orb, which aids her in the quest. And then she joins a clandestine department, the Department of Curiosities, and and then she meets up with the men in grey again and has to try to stop them doing things as well. She's also torn between two things. Does she work for the Queen and the Empire, or does she work for the Department of Curiosities, or does she do her own thing? There's a whole loyalty thing happening there, because she doesn't like some of the things that the Empire is doing, as and Adrian was saying before about, we will talk more about that tomorrow in the steampunk thing, yes. What Tillie lacks in experience, she makes up for in intelligence, enthusiasm and perseverance. She's been to the best schools and trained as a cryptologist. You know what a cryptologist is? And you can spell that one out, don't you? Yes. Which comes in your book. And she's determined to use every possible opportunity to find out information to assist her in a quest about finding out what happened to her father. And her biggest dilemma is knowing who to trust. So, does she trust Professor Avery Ellington, who's actually Lord? He's a Lord as well. He prefers to be called Professor. So when she meets Avery Ellington, he introduced himself as Professor Ellington because he doesn't like to be defined by his birthright. He likes to be defined by the works he's done, and he's actually done quite a lot of science. There's a lot of scientists in this one. He prefers to think that he's earned the position in the Department of Curiosities rather than being given it because of his heritage. He understands what's to be judged, obviously, and so he's willing to take her on her merits as well. And at the times, that was very rare for men to do that with ladies, so woohoo. Once the loyalty, he gives loyalty, it takes a lot to get rid of his loyalty, and he works for the clandestine society as well. Then we've got a couple of other characters. The General, we mentioned the General, he was actually part of the Royal Society, and he actually, which is really cool from a scientific point of view, he actually did treaties on magnetic fields and was a scientific advisor to Admiralty and everything, so it's quite interesting. And then you've got a few other characters which you'll meet along the way. There's Grace, who's a maid, and Harrow, who's the offsider, and people are getting bored, so I'll go skip that bit there. And there's a villain, gotta have a villain. He likes to be known as the Professor because he's a bit of a wanker. He's a bit of a...
Quick one.
What do you think? Shall I say that again? Harrow, who knows of this guy, he says the inventor, he scoffed. I always thought that name was pretentious, so it gives you a bit of an idea what the villain's like. He likes to think he's important, but yeah. Okay, right, so, I think I'm going the wrong way. Yeah, they're all over the place. Okay. Oh, I've also done a new thing. I wrote a song. You can get it. It's called The Gadgeteer. Go look at the nice website. You can download that. It's fun. It was on the radio the other day on Words Out Loud, if anyone listens to PBA. Yay for PBA. Okay, right. So, what time is it?
1:15.
Okay, right. So, I can do a bit of a reading. Is that what? Happy with that? Yeah, that's what you came for, wasn't it? Yeah. Okay. Last year I did chapter 1 because I was running a bit late on getting the book out. So this time I'm going to do chapter 4. Chapter 1 introduced Professor Avery, or Lord Avery, and the Department of Curiosities, and they were both looking for the same thing in another guy's house, and they came across this automaton type thing that tried to get them. And so chapter 2 and 3, she's met the Queen. The Queen's been talking to her about things and trying to get her on her side, and she's been working for the Department of Curiosity and just learning a little bit about that. So we're going to come in at a little bit into chapter 4, where you're going to meet some more guys. And she's come home after spending the night with the Department of Curiosities, and she's come home to Aunt Prudence and wondering what she should tell her. Okay, so I always get nervous doing these, so bear with me. Trying to turn this down. Right, Tillie's heels clicked on the tiled floor as she made her way into the parlour where Aunt Prudence would often nap in the afternoon. She tapped on the parlour door and eased it open. The room was dark, the drapes still drawn and the fire unlit. Aunt Prudence? She waited for her eyes to adjust to the dim light, tiptoed to her aunt's favourite armchair, and sank her fingers into the deep blue velvet upholstery. Are you still sleeping? She smiled and peeked over the back of the chair. It was vacant. Empty. That's the doobie things. The doobie, yes. So, when the orb talks, by the way, it's talking in her head, just so you know, okay? So, empty, whispered the orb. I can see that, I'm not blind. She shook her head and examined the fireplace. The parlour was her aunt's refuge, always warm and inviting. Tillie wrapped her fingers around the fire poker and jabbed the remnants of the charred wood and coals in the hearth. They were cold and black. She frowned and scanned the room with its blue velvet wallpaper, padded velvet upholstered furniture, and plush carpeted floor. A pile of books had toppled from the bookshelf and lay strewn across the floor behind the settee. A chill ran down Tillie's spine. Her footsteps pattered on the carpet as she edged back to the hallway. Silence, hissed the orb. She paused to listen. Nothing. She crept along the passageway, past the hall table. The midday post was still on the silver platter. On top was the familiar note addressed to Aunt Prudence in Tillie's own handwriting. She'd written her a note from the previous night about where she was, just so you know. Her heart raced as she made her way past the stairs, further along the hallway towards the study. The house was too quiet, no noise from the kitchen. Mary should be preparing the dinner right now. There was no noise from... There was a thump on the stairs above her. Her heart lurched. She hitched up her silk skirts, secured them in place, then snatched up one of her aunt's favourite ceramic Chinese vases and crept up the main stairs. A single shaft of light shone on the carpeted stairs, casting half in shadows, half in light. She squinted, attempting to adjust to varying light levels. Intruder! The orb's psychic scream pierced her mind. I should have yelled for that one. The vase slipped from her fingers and thunked down the carpeted steps. She clutched her head. Her hem trembled around her ankles. She caught the banister with a free hand. A pale grey limb snaked out of the shadows and grasped at her sleeve. Its sinewy fingers fumbled on the blue silk. Not my new silk dress! Tillie jerked her arm away in time to avoid any damage. She tugged up her skirts and dashed down the stairway into the darkened hall. Footsteps scampered along the floor above. More thumps came from the direction of the stairs. 3, the orb advised in military fashion. Tillie scooped up the vase and thrust it before her at arm's length, ready to strike anyone or anything that dared to approach. She reached out with the other hand and felt her way along the hallway, back to the safety of the front door. Her silk sleeves switched against her bodice as she swept the vase left then right in an attempt to ward off any unseen invader. A strong hand grabbed her wrist and yanked her aside. A pale face greeted her with a sneer. Where? It slurred, its words barely discernible. Tillie screamed and brought Aunt Prudence's Chinese vase crashing down on the man's ghost-like head. She wrenched her hair free, and the ghostman's grip loosened, and he fell onto the floor with a satisfying thud. The faint outline of his companion lingered along the hall. He was not alone. Run! The orbs... Sorry, it's hard to read this in this line. Run! The orb's shriek flooded every corner of the mind. She retreated towards the front door, groping for the doorknob in the darkness behind her. A sliver of light pierced the gloom, reflecting off the hall mirror, and lit her escape route. There was another flash of pale grey skin. Damnation! She'd forgotten there was 3 of them. Now weaponless, she pressed against the hall, trying to meld into the shadows. Trapped, hissed the horde. I told you before I'm not blind, she said. That's in her head. A metal knob dug into her shoulder, and she was besieged by her aunt's red war cloak. There was the cloak. There was a... She smiled and stretched out her fingers. Her fingertips brushed against Aunt Prudence's parasol. Its smooth, ornately carved and unexpectedly heavy ivory handle was icy cold to the touch. She wrapped her fingers around the parasol shaft, drew it silently from the stand in one smooth movement, and swung the ostentatious handle directly into the face of the oncoming ghostman. There was a gratifying crack, followed warm splashes on her face, and then there was one. Tillie turned towards the remaining intruder and who blocked her way. She hefted the parasol in her hand, comforted by its extra weight. They may not have expected such resistance from a household of women. She would show them otherwise. She was ready to fend herself, her home, and her family. She gritted her teeth and braced herself for the oncoming fray. The ghostman lurched forward, then hesitated. In the mirror's reflected light, Tillie caught sight of his grey, otherworldly eyes. He glanced over at his fallen compasses, then focused his attention on her. He grinned and reached inside his coat. She stared down the barrel of a large pistol, too close, even in poor light. Even in poor light, he would have to be inept to miss his target. Her fingers trembled. She made a mental note of the distance between them. She couldn't outrun that bullet. She raised a parasol in a futile attempt to protect herself, and wondered if the Department of Curiosities had a bullet-shielding parasol in their archived vaults. A brilliant light engulfed her. There was a loud crack. She flinched, prepared herself for the inevitable agony, but there was nothing. No pain, no sound. The world slowed as Tillie's eyes adjusted to the midday sun. Slowly outlines formed. A tall figure silhouetted in the open doorway. Her heart raced. Her hands trembled. Her vision shimmered. Not another one. The orb must have miscounted. Every muscle in her body tensed, preparing for another attack. The figure spoke, his voice almost drowned out by the pounding of the blood in her ears. Sir Avery Allington dropped his arm. Smoke dribbles from the muzzle of his pistol. He surveyed the hall. Before him lay the crumpled body. Blood oozed from the bullet wounds on his side. A crimson pool seeped into the oriental carpet and formed a gory halo around his head. Another body lay at Miss Meriwether's feet. A third lay motionless, surrounded by a multitude of porcelain shards too far away to act at the... Sorry about that. A third lay motionless, surrounded by a multiple of porcelain shards. It was too far away to assess its injuries. Miss Meriwether stood defiantly among the fallen, looking charmingly dishevelled. Her bonnet hung precariously, held by a remaining hat pin to reveal less than pristine coiffure. She brandished a red parasol, swinging it like a golf club around her legs. Her skirts hitched up, revealing the ankles of new leather boots. Lord Allington. Her voice was faint. Are you unharmed? He asked. I believe so. She tucked a lock of blonde hair back into her bun. The hat pin fell silently onto the carpet. The bonnet followed and landed in a pool of blood with... any questions? No questions? Anyone got a question? No? Anything else you want to know? Sorry, yeah?
The orb.
The orb, yes.
Yes. The orb talks to her psychically.
Yeah,
She talked to it verbally.
She can do both. So it depends on whether there's someone else around. If someone else isn't around, she'll probably just talk back to it in her own voice, because it annoys her half the time. It gets more narky as the story goes on. But if other people are around, she'll talk to it in the head, because other people don't know this thing talks to her. They think it's just annually.
So if it can read her thoughts, can it read other people's thoughts?
No, it's less of reading thoughts and more of a connection between them that they can talk. It can put feelers out, and like it's worked out there's 3 of them because it sort of can see things, and it warns her a lot, and that's how she's got through a lot of her stuff, and it gives her clues, and she follows them blindly for a while, but then she turns around and starts saying, well, hang on, why am I doing this? So, because she's been told what to do, so, and you don't like being told what to do, so yeah, so it's a, yeah.
So it's like Bluetooth. She's paired with it and
Sort of a bit like that, yes. And there are reasons why it's like that, which we'll find out eventually, but that is spoiler territory. That is definitely spoiler territory. So yeah, the orbs are weird, but I don't know how, I do. I was just looking at stuff on the internet, and there was this picture of an eyeball type thing in a ball, brass ball, and it had screws and stuff coming out of it, and the whole story plopped in my head. So it's very convoluted. So, anything else? So we've got some books. This is actually a full-length novel. If you've read some other ones, they were short stories and novellas. This is actually a full-length novel, and it's $24 if you want to get that one. I didn't press the buttons like I was going to press the buttons. I had it all worked out so I can press the buttons, and then you get some stuff there. So this is why I'm all dressed up in this today. As I said, tomorrow I'm doing this talk on steampunk, and I will be talking about things that you brought up, because there's been big debates about that, and it's affected steampunk differently in different countries, so we'll talk about that tomorrow. So if you want to come on to that one, you probably will have some good questions to throw at me, to fling at me like mud.
Can I just ask, do Japanese do steampunk?
Yes. I'm collecting a whole heap of Oriental material because I actually want to do an Oriental steampunk. You get a lot. Steampunk. There's a lot of Asian steampunk. There's a couple of Indian writers who do steampunk. South America, Mexican, Spain. Then you've got the Nordic countries, England, Africa. There's set all over the place.
Everywhere.
It's everywhere except.
Russia? No,
Yes,
China?
yes, there are Russian steampunk places. Yes, you can actually find there's a whole heap of them around the place. America's different though, because they tend to see what they see. So we'll talk a bit more that that's a whole talk unto itself.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So you were saying about groups are located in those places.
Yes.
Do they have a particular style?
Yes.
You can say, oh, that looks like an Australian outback steampunk.
There's not enough Australian steampunk. I'm working on that. There is actually a couple of Australian steampunk authors, some of which set them in Australia. But I think some of the stories, you need big populations, and that's why we default back to London. In this one, by the end of the book of this one, we are in Australia. Tillie actually comes from Australia, and there's a comment in there that she would have had a more colonial accent. Yes, so the second book would be mostly set in Australia. And I've got some other short stories, as I said, set in Australia, because we have a lot of interesting things we can do over here.
So for the less well-travelled,
yeah.
can you sort of look at a style and say, I think that might belong to a particular area?
In a way you can. Each area has a different way they put their costumes together as well. There was, I must remember to bring the international steampunk books tomorrow. There's a couple of ones that have been done of anthologies, and the most recent one was one where they did half the stories in English and half the stories in the original language of the writers. And there was a lot of Spanish ones in there. They tend to focus on different things in the stories, and they dress differently. And when you go on the websites and look at things, after a while you'll start getting, oh, that's probably Nordic countries, and that's probably French, and that's probably Spanish or South American, and that's probably, you tend to, It's good. That's the good thing about it. And we were asking before about definitions of steampunk. I'm going to do that again tomorrow, because that's the great thing about steampunk, is it can be different to everyone, and that's why I like it, because it's loosey-goosey type thing. It's there's a lot more now going into Edwardian era or earlier into Regency steampunk, which is quite interesting. I've got something we'll talk about tomorrow as well. But yeah, it's lots of fun. Whimsy. Anything else? They're having conversation between ourselves over here. Yeah, that's okay. So that's the latest book is Department of Curiosities. There's going to be at least 2 and 95% chance of 3 in this series with those characters, and then I'll be doing a different series, same world, different characters, different level of that. So before I started writing these, I have 3 different levels in my steampunk world, which sounds weird. You've got the adventure level, which is the everyday sort of level that most people will see. Then you've got the next level down, which is sort of like the Jack the Rippers and the Mummies one. That's the Viola Stewart one. So if I go back to that picture, oh, that's nice, lovely. Some of you might recognise Blake there. That's what he wears every day. So he was Lord Ellington for my thing. Okay, so in Viola, it's that sort of gas lamp end where the creatures come in and they could be real. I always have that, are they real or are they not? And I try to leave it open. And then there's another level. I was never going to write vampire stories. I said I was never going to write vampire stories. Because everyone does. So it's sort of the level, sort of underground, under where you've got paranormal things. So vampires do exist and those things do exist. They're all there. And in the background, I know things that are happening in here that are actually affected by them. So they're doing things to the world. And so it's a series, it's a book with vampires rather than a vampire story. And it has the men in grey in it again because they're always in there doing horrible things to people and things. So yeah, it says 3 different levels to my worlds, and that's what I write about. And all the time when these things are happening, I know in the background what's happening. So there is actually a reason in the series, the steamer series in this world that's going to come next. It tells you why there's not a lot of electricity. So when they come across in Viola Stewart, this one where they have these crackling tubes of electricity, that is a really rare thing to have. And only the Department of Curiosities and the police have that. And there's actually a reason for that. So, because, you know, my head's...
There's a whole universe in there. And
there's several universes actually. Well, Auntie Enid has that, it introduces multiverses. It's called the Otherworld series, so that's the Auntie Enid Mysteries. So we have a world, and then there's all these other worlds. So your world with fairies are there, and your world with demons is here, and so it's all these multiverses, and they try to crack through. So there's too many worlds in my head. So, anything else? So, okay, cool. Well, I've got some books here if you want to buy some books before you go. And I'm going to be back down at my stall after this. So, thank you very much for coming. Thank you to Anne. And thank you to Tracy for doing the sign. The sign? Yep. Thank you. And this is how you go, clapping them. Oh. Okay? Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you very much.